Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Warboys. I am the Global Vice Chair of Leadership and Training for the IEEE Young Professionals. And I'm going to tell you a little bit what Young Professionals is today before we start our presentation. So the cool thing is we used to be called the IEEE Gold. And last year at the Global Humanitarian Technology Conference, we announced that we were changing our name to Young Professionals. So it's basically a year today that we have announced our name change to Young Professionals. And with that has come a lot of changes. So you'll see that when you go to make your membership renewal this year, things have changed from last year. There's going to be the new criteria for being in the Young Professionals is 15 years from your first professional degree, and you also have the ability to opt in afterwards. It's going to be a membership more like joining a society, so you have the ability to add that to your card. Make sure you do that. And some people are like, why do I want to be in the Young Professionals after the 15 years? What I can tell you is, if you're in the Young Professionals, you can help support us. You can help find out what we're doing and be able to be there to help the young professionals grow into their IEEE careers. The crazy thing is that worldwide we have 111,000 members now, but last year before we had this criteria change, it was only 55,000. So within the first 10 years of graduating, we only have 55,000 people, and then the 5 years after that, there's another 56,000 people. So we're losing the young people within the IEEE, and we need to make sure we address that concern. So if you can take the time to go out to your young professionals groups and help them build their skills and get into the careers and IEEE, they'll find it very valuable and maybe will be around for us in the future. I'm going to pass the mic over now to Anh Bui, who is the Director of Product Strategy for Benetech. Benetech does a lot of humanitarian efforts with technology, and there's a wide variety of what they do. So she's going to tell you a little bit more about that, as well as tell you about why you should care about doing good with your technology backgrounds.
Thank you, Tim. Let me just make sure. Thank you very much. And thanks for having me, everyone. It's really an honor and a privilege for me to be here just because it's always a thrill to be able to address a crowd like this who, just by being here has already demonstrated just how passionate you are. Is that better? Hang on a second. There's a mic adjustment that needs to happen. How's that? Okay, great. And passionate and patient, and really capable of making extraordinary change, which I think is really what we're here to talk about, is how do we go about making extraordinary change. So, as you can tell by the title of the talk, I'm really here to talk about empowering people to make change. And by that I mean I'm going to share some of the experience that I and my colleagues at Benetech have had in producing some of the most critical factors that have led to our success. And a lot of that has to do with the first part of that title, which is empowering people. So we're going to talk about actually communities of change. And this is one of those communities and how we can leverage that. So first, a little bit about Benetech. So for those of you who don't know Benetech, we are a Palo Alto, California-based nonprofit in technology, and Palo Alto is just 15 minutes up the Highway 101 for those of you who are a little bit local. And we focus on 4 core areas. Global literacy, which is our largest area, which is what I represent, focuses on addressing content literacy and access to information needs for folks whose needs are not met by the normal marketplace. So we focus a lot, for instance, on people with disabilities. Human rights and documenting human rights abuses with technology, the environment and conservation, and something called Benetech Labs, which is really focused on experimenting to see what the next big product we can come up with is that will have an order of magnitude change in the world. And it's, I think, a nice thing to hear a little bit about Benetech's founding story, particularly with a group like this, because it's really a classic founding story. It's entrepreneurship meets vision, meets technology, meets a little bit of capital, right? So Benetech actually emerged from the work of our founder and CEO, who's named Jim Fruchterman. And Jim is a reformed rocket scientist / social entrepreneur / MacArthur genius who, back in 1989, established a company called Arkenstone to create reading machines for folks who were blind. And that was a fairly successful adventure. And so in 2000, he sold off the reading machine side of the business and reinvented Arkenstone into what's today Benetech. And Benetech really has made hundreds of thousands of people's lives better through a variety of products and services. So I've just listed a couple of them up here. Bookshare, which is the flagship product from the Global Literacy Program, is the world's largest online library of accessible digital books for people with print disabilities. So that print disabilities are things like blindness, low vision, severe dyslexia, anything that would prevent you from using a printed book. We also released Martis, which is a secure app for human rights bulletins, and which really has allowed a lot of frontline human rights defenders to safely document abuse and safely encrypt their data. And Marathi has empowered environmental practitioners to succeed in their efforts to protect species and ecosystems around the world. And in the middle here, you see something called the Diagram Center, which we're going to talk a lot more about, so I won't say anything too much about it right now. Okay, so by the numbers, what have we been able to accomplish since 2000? So global literacy is serving over 330,000 users in nearly 50 countries. The vast majority of those users are actually students and in the United States, those students receive free access to over 300,000 books in the Bookshare collection if they have a qualifying print disability, thanks to funding from the Department of Education, the US Department of Ed. And we have more than 6 million ebooks that have been downloaded from Bookshare, and we're really closing in very quickly on 7 million. So a lot of impact from a single service there. In human rights, we've Martis, that secure data app I mentioned, has 220,000 accounts of violations that have been secured. Hundreds of groups and individuals in 50 countries have been trained in data security by our field teams. In the environment, 170 different environmental conservation teams in 170 different countries have used Marathi to protect species and ecosystems and model conservation efforts. And finally, our Benetech Labs program, which is really our newest program. And within Benetech Labs, we've engaged more than 1,000 software professionals to use volunteer skills to help with humanitarian tech projects via something called social coding for good, which again is something I'm going to say a little bit more about later on, so won't dwell on that right now. But I don't like to just use numbers because, as we all know, numbers don't always tell the whole story. So I wanted to just show you a very brief video so that you could hear some of the impact that Bookshare has had from a family who has really experienced that impact. So let's hope this works. Alt-tab. Just need to be able to. Not happening. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Let's do that. No. Hang on.
I'm Drake Leong. My son is Kevin Leong. Life before Bookshare was very difficult. When Kevin was in kindergarten, he had an organic brain injury, and it affected his vision. It affected it dramatically. He was in a coma for 2 weeks, and when he came out, he had to relearn to walk and relearn to use the bathroom, and he had to relearn to do everything. After Kevin's brain injury, there were several years that went by where Kevin struggled in school. He really had a difficult time reading, so any kind of print reading was very difficult for the tracking. But the problem was, when you have normal-sized print in the classrooms, he would really struggle, and he just wouldn't read. He wouldn't read at all. When he was 2nd and 3rd grade, he was frequently at least 1 year behind the class as far as reading level and writing skills. So once we learned how to use Bookshare, and we got it online for him. It really was very beneficial because he didn't have to see the normal print. He could enlarge the print on his computer or on his iPad, and he could have high contrast. So he would always have black and white or white on black, and the high contrast was very helpful for him as well as the large print. And it allowed him more independence, so he could take it with him. And now that he's a little bit older, he even carries it with him. So he carries it with his iPhone, and he can pull it out. And whenever he's sitting somewhere waiting for us to pick him up after school, or waiting somewhere in a grocery store or whatever, he just pulls out his phone and he'll just start reading. But when he's very tired, he can also just turn it on and it will read to him. So he can still listen and he can get the book and he can get the gist of it. That's very helpful as well for school. So he's able to keep up with the reading and keep up with the materials, and it really helps him be very confident. And so he is staying on par with class, and he's actually ahead of his grade, whereas before we had Bookshare, he was falling way behind. And he has to try harder than anybody else. He realized that because he has a disability, he has to try harder. He knows that he has to work harder, and it's difficult because he sees his little brother, and his little brother doesn't have to try very hard, and he just can always keep up. And the beautiful thing is that he wants to do well. So I would like to tell parents if they have a child that has a print disability to give Bookshare a try. And the accessibility and the portability is wonderful because they can access it anywhere and they can have it on the go, and it can help them read very easily. Encourage your child to learn and persevere and continue to be hopeful.
So I'm always really moved by the Leong family's story, and I know that my colleagues are as well, because it's being able to connect with families like this and speak with Kevin and his dad that really makes that personal connection for us, that really inspires our work. It's invaluable. So, I suspect that many of you, if not all of you in this room, are moved by a similar story somewhere. A story that, starts with a need, ends with some technology. It doesn't have to be the most cutting edge, doesn't have to be the greatest, newest, brightest, shiniest technology, but it's something that really meets that need in a way that was not conceivable before by the person with that need. And so for many of you for whom that kind of story is moving, you're going to take a path that's very similar to the path that Jim Fruchterman took to found Benetech. You're going to be entrepreneurial. You are going to get a little capital, you're going to find your vision, you're going to blaze incredible trails. And I encourage each of you with that kind of spirit and energy to seize that moment. This moment right now when technology is so pervasive, to devote yourselves to that kind of work. But let's say you're not that, you don't have that entrepreneurial spirit. Or you're just not ready to commit 100% fully of your time 100% to the nonprofit sector, maybe not even to a social enterprise, a for-profit social enterprise. Or say you want to do good while doing something else, something of the many other things you might be interested in. Or let's say you do have that entrepreneurial spirit, that you really have a passion to start something, to drive something, and you've got just one piece of the puzzle, and you need a few more pieces to fit together to see your ultimate vision take shape. Luckily, you are not alone. And that's really the key, and that's the thing that I want to focus on tonight, because part of Benetech's continuing success and our growth is recognizing and harnessing the power of the tech community in general, as a community. So when I say you're not alone, I mean not only that there are many people like you, not just in this room, but outside this room as well, but together you are that much more powerful than individually. And together, you can have that much more impact. And that philosophy is really reflective of one of Benetech's 7 truths. So if you were to go to Benetech's website, benetech.org, and learn a little bit about us, click on the About page, you'll see that we actually have 7 truths that we've laid out about how, just our general ethos. And our 5th truth is that we are better together, right? That partnership over going alone is important. Part of that truth is Benetech's strength is in developing technology responsive to real-world needs, but we can't do it alone. So, how do we do that together? How does empowerment occur through community? How do we empower good people like you, who wouldn't be here if you weren't already passionate about doing good, to leverage your skills, knowledge, talents to the utmost? How do we inspire each other to meaningful action? To talk about that, I want to talk about a case study. And I promised earlier that I would come back to something called the Diagram Center, something that's really near and dear to my heart. I happen to, along with my other product strategy title, I happen to also run the Diagram Center at Benetech. So we're going to do a little bit of a case study. And the Diagram Center is an R&D center. And we are funded by the Department of Education, again, and focused on making it easier, faster, cheaper to make and use accessible graphics. What's an accessible graphic? Well, because so much information right now is conveyed visually, particularly, and because we're Department of Ed funded, this is particularly for students, so like you think of a typical textbook or even online learning resource, so much of that information is conveyed visually, and this is increasingly an issue for students with both print disabilities and other disabilities. So Diagram is really looking at a lot of different technologies to make something, a graphic accessible. So the most common one you might think of is a text description, right? You have an alt text, you have a description somewhere that's associated with that graphic. But you know, as you might guess, a description is actually pretty hard to come by. Takes human resource to do it. It takes somebody who actually can identify the picture. So we're looking at ways to automate those descriptions. And sometimes a description is not adequate. Say you've got something that's really spatially complex. What you really want is something called a tactile graphic, something that you can feel, that you can touch, that you can actually sense the spatial relationships in. You might want something sonified. So somebody studying math who wants to know what a sine curve is might get the best sense of that sine curve by actually hearing a sound that maps to it. So, you know, that's a sonification. My best imitation for the night. And then finally, we've got a whole bunch of new technologies that are coming up on board that really sort of open up new doors for conveying other types of information. Haptics are a big area that we're exploring because touchscreens are getting better and better about haptic interfaces and the resolution they can provide. 3D printing is another place where we're seeing a revolution that could provide actual tangible educational objects in the hands of students in classrooms. So a lot of different technologies. Way more than a team our size of engineers and product folks could possibly master. So how do we do that successfully? The answer, of course, is collaboration. And collaboration is really built in the DNA of Diagram. What you're looking at is a Wordle. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Wordles, but Wordles are essentially, you take a bunch of text and you run it through some analysis, and it emphasizes the words that come up most powerfully in that text. This happens to be a Wordle from feedback from one of our Diagram Center convenings. And you'll see, you know, there's some wonderful words in here: great, phenomenal, you know, brightest, community, respect. But by far the biggest, boldest word here is collaboration. It's something that everyone who enters into the Diagram Center community recognizes right from the get-go. What's not really that unusual about the Diagram Center is that we entered into getting funding from the Department of Ed with a collaboration in mind. So we went out, we sought funding in conjunction with two partners, the National Center for Accessible Media out of WGBH, which is in Boston, which for those of you in the US, you know them as the closed captioning people, and US Fund for DAISY, which internationally is a standards body for accessible digital content, digital books, really, globally. What's a little more unusual is actually that the grant acknowledged these two partners, but it explicitly allowed us to figure out what the best and most promising technologies would be and seed them without naming additional partners. In other words, we were given the latitude to say, let's figure out what the best and most promising technologies could be to address this issue of images and accessibility. And our approach was really to gather as big a tent as we could, get a lot of other voices in the room and a lot of other potential partners to help us figure out, and in some case, execute the work that was needed. So, in other words, this is a picture here of one of our first gatherings of the Diagram community. We wanted to work with all our technological allies, people who could bring fresh technological ideas and insights to the problems at hand. We created working groups that, again, made that big tent that brought in people who might normally be competitors, and that was really key. competitors into the same space. And one of the most wonderful things about working in this social space is that there's an openness of spirit that allows that. I always get really encouraged when I hear someone say, you know, this is a really small field, accessibility. There's not that much money in it. And I'm sure many of you are in fields, you know, humanitarian fields that have that same issue. But, you know, it's a small field, so we're really happy to work with you. We're happy to work together. And that happens more often than not. How many of you know SOCAP, the Social Capital Group? Yeah, so a couple of people have seen SOCAP. So SOCAP is a group that brings together a couple thousand impact investors, social entrepreneurs, social enterprise, people with interested in social enterprises, corporate social responsibility folks together, usually in San Francisco, to talk about how they move that field forward. And I was really actually delighted that this year's theme was igniting communities, which I was very grateful to see. But you know, something that I heard at SOCAP a lot, and not necessarily from nonprofits, was, you know, how come more nonprofits don't work together? How come they seem to be duplicating efforts or, you know, even working at cross purposes? And luckily, we found in Diagram that that's not the case. That people are really often willing to join forces if you have a driver to do that, if you give them the scaffolding to join forces, because that's really the hard part. So we pulled in leading technologists from across the field. We didn't assume we had all the answers, and we wanted a breadth of expertise. So that meant that we'd had the benefits of having Wolfram Research come work on interactives with us. The Educational Testing Service look at haptics. We've had access to developers at Google, great minds at SAS. We looked at some automated accessible graphs just last week with folks at IBM. Our advisory board includes representatives from Adobe, from Google, from Pearson, the world's largest publisher, from W3C, lots of different groups from a variety of places who may or may not be expressly interested in accessibility, but we knew that we could bring those forces together to do some really great work. Okay, so of course we didn't stop there. We didn't stop with the technology allies, because you won't be surprised to hear that, of course, it was really important for us to listen to the voices of the communities that we wanted to serve as well. So parents, teachers, students who can keep us honest, right? That we're not looking at the shiniest, brightest thing simply for the sake of it being shiny and innovative, that we're really looking for something that could be useful, that would be adopted, that the community could really get behind. So we brought a lot of these groups together who, you know, typically, if you bring a bunch of teachers together with a bunch of engineers from, say, Google, the conversation can be difficult sometimes. But we were able to get past that. Not difficult because they didn't care about what each other had to say, but vocabularies are different. You know, the ways people approach problems can be very different. And that was actually a very good catalyst for conversation. So we really worked collaboratively together. Field experts and technology experts. We had meetings, face-to-face meetings, and virtual meetings. Social media, blogging kept us up to date on things. We went through brainstorms and working groups, and we rolled up our sleeves and we did hacks. So, you know, you're saying, oh, that's great. You met a lot. That's wonderful. So what's great about meeting a lot? Well, yeah, they were a lot of fun. We got a lot of great ideas. They were very eye-opening. We got a lot of cross-talk across sectors, which was very important. But really, push comes to shove, the proof is in the output. The proof is in the software and its actual use. So I want to take a look at one of the projects that grew out of these collaborations. And it's something called MathML Cloud. And I think its inception story really reflects the nature of our work as a group, as a community. So a little background on MathML Cloud. MathML Cloud actually solves a basic but pervasive problem in digital textbooks. So essentially because a lot of math is very typographically tricky to write, and a lot of you may use LaTeX, et cetera, to get around that, publishers typically resort to serving up equations as flat images. So a student using a screen reader or another kind of book reader is going along reading, and instead of hearing the math, they get image, or even worse, some really long file name that doesn't make any sense. So you can imagine how frustrating that is. You can imagine particularly how frustrating that is in a math textbook. So MathML Cloud really allows publishers to continue to serve MathUp as images so that they can have that typographic fidelity. But then also it automatically produces a text transcription so that the student actually hears something useful. So in this case, instead of image, you get start frac y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1, end frac equals minus 10. And for many who are learning math auditorially, that's actually a much more useful way to get that equation. So MathML Cloud does a bunch of other things as well, but I think the gist of it is this automated transcription. And it's gotten a lot of interest from and attention from publishers who've actually worked with us during its development, and we'll be releasing it later this year. Okay, so how did we get this started? It started when we rolled up our sleeves and actually hacked together. Hacking together is actually one of the most effective ways we can work together as a community. It takes not a whole lot of commitment from someone, maybe a day or two. So back in May 2013, we got together in Menlo Park, again, not too far up the street, and joined forces with a few other folks who work on digital textbooks, who were interested in building some more accessibility in those books. And of course, we said, yes, we want to help with that. And a small group during that, what we called accessibility sprint, broke off to work specifically on math. And we were really lucky because we had representatives there from MathJax, which is a JavaScript library for math on the web, and the developer behind Google's Chromebox math voicing. So we had sort of the right mix of people in the room. And by the end of the day, we had a functioning prototype. So you often hear that a single day is really not enough to do anything worthwhile, that hackathons are kind of, well, great, I spent 6 hours and now what? Well, we did enough in a day to get a rough prototype, yes, but more importantly, and this was really critical, we did enough in a day to prove that we could actually work together. That as people, we could sit at a table, pound out some code, and actually work together. And we had the same vision, we had the same sort of end goal in mind, and we could work around the more ancillary issues that might arise. So, as I said, one day is not enough because one of the most difficult parts of rolling up your sleeves is recognizing that you can only write so much code. But if you have a proof of relationship as well as a proof of concept, you can actually find more time, more impact, more follow-up. And it was really important for us that this project and these relationships not wither on the vine. So when you know you're onto something, you can grab it. And it really helps if you have a couple of the partners who can grab that same rope and pull on it with you. And that's really what happened. We extended the life of this project through new partnerships. So I mentioned MathJax. That's the American Mathematical Society, which is behind MathJax, the Chromebox developer. And because we continued to foster that relationship, we were able to move really quickly when an unexpected funding opportunity came up to fund MathML Cloud's development and to actually create a service behind it. And that came from Microsoft's Tech for Good program, a corporate program for Microsoft, which saw a lot of value and potential impact in this project. But if it weren't for the fact that we, A, had the prototype, and B, had developed these relationships, we wouldn't have been able to pull the trigger that quickly on this proposal. So we were able to lay a lot of groundwork early. So there were a couple other factors also that allowed us to develop MathML Cloud quickly. First and foremost, it's an open source project. So which means that all the code is available for free to anyone who wants to use it or help with it. It's also a commercial-friendly open source product. That means that if you wanted to build something on top of it that was commercial, more power to you. This kind of freedom of licensing really allowed more people to come to the table. The project also attracted volunteers from within Microsoft itself. And they were able to add a lot of expertise, of course. And we also had a couple other volunteers coming through Google Summer of Code, so a variety of other corporate partners were able to send us volunteers who were very interested in math. And we were able to make technology decisions with that kind of volunteer core in mind. So, very quickly, we built it on we built it in a way that streamlined environment building. So somebody could jump in and build a dev environment very quickly. We chose a storage stack that was really widely used because we figured there would be fewer barriers for somebody who wanted to come in and help with the project. So we made technology decisions not purely on the basis of the technology, but also on the basis of, can we keep a core of volunteers going? We were also super open about our roadmap and our goals. In fact, our wiki is wide open. So if you wanted today to go on and find out a little bit more about MathML Cloud and see our roadmap, you could do it. And again, this is so volunteers could really have some confidence in where we were going, so they could see what we were aiming for and also kind of see where they might fit in the pathways. So again, MathML Cloud is going to be released at the end of this year, and really I'm particularly proud of it because of the way that collaboration has played a role in its birth. So just to recap, the lessons in effective collaboration that came from this project for us, and really come from the way that we've worked on in the Diagram Center on a variety of projects. We had clear action items, making sure that your partners and your volunteers have very clear tasks. You know, it's funny because whenever we meet with our group of, our diagram community at large, we don't ever hear, you know, really, I don't really have bandwidth, don't ask too much of me. Well, I mean, we sort of hear that. But what we hear more than that, a lot more, is, you know, use me really well, direct me, give me a task. If you give me a task, I will deliver it. I mean, these are people who, like you, have a lot of energy, have a lot of passion. You give them something very specific to do, and they'll grab hold of it. We have an extended plan of action, like I said, a roadmap. Again, clarity of vision, incredibly critical, particularly for either a volunteer or a partnership, a collaboration type situation. That the fact that you can see the same goal at the end, critical. Nurturing your access to stakeholders and end users, making sure that even at those times when you don't have funding around the corner, you're continuing to nurture those relationships, continuing to find ways where you can do a little brainstorm, conversation, stay in touch, so that when the opportunity does arise, you're ready and you've got your partners in place. Use an open platform whenever possible. Again, openness and transparency, but also business friendly, allows even competitors to get more comfortable in the space together. And then finally, build for collaboration. Keep in mind that as you're building, that your own developers aren't the only ones who are working in the code. So clear documentation, assets, picking the right technology stack, all part of that collaboration equation. Okay, so that's MathML Cloud. And you know, those steps that or those elements that I just ran through, we've applied those to a number of different projects. And they're not necessarily just software projects. So for instance, we applied the formula to what we call the accessible image sample book. So the accessible image sample book is an actual EPUB or HTML5 book that does what I just did verbally earlier, which is to give you all these examples of an accessible image so that you don't have to think, well, what do they mean by accessible? And it gives you code samples in case you wanted to emulate something like that in your web page or your ebook. And we were actually able to get help from leading experts in Braille and tactile graphics, leading experts in accessible math, leading experts in standards and markup, representatives from the world's largest publisher. Why did they all come together to build this? Not because we paid them, because in most cases we didn't, but because they believed in the clear vision behind what we wanted to accomplish. They could believe in it because they actually helped shape this. You know, we had Pearson raising their hand and saying, you know, this would be really helpful for us. There was something really tangible, too, that they could put their sweat equity behind. It wasn't just a sort of vague project. And so now this set of best practices is being incorporated into the production guidelines of several major publishers, and we're really excited because what it means is from this, you know, not very complex project is going to come, hopefully, a world of new accessible books for students, not just in the United States, but around the world. The other place where we've applied the formula is in 3D printing. So our ability to sort of harness a community really got the attention of another federal agency, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And the IMLS funds actually a lot of makerspaces throughout the United States. So in libraries, you can find 3D printers, you can find Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and what have you, in an effort to bring people to the library to create, not just to consume, but to create. And we saw an opportunity to say, well, you know, there are some underutilized 3D printers are out there in local communities that could really use a way to create better educational objects for students with disabilities in the school down the street, in the school in the same district. How do we bring these groups together so they can leverage what they have, the technological resources in the makerspaces in the libraries or museums, and the educators in the schools. So we brought those communities together, and now we are being funded to actually hold a national forum exactly on that nexus between education and libraries and museums and 3D printing. And from that, we hope to see a lot of interesting projects and pilots coming out of the relationships formed there as well. Okay. So those are just a few examples of collaborations coming from the Diagram Center. Diagram is not alone either. Within Benetech, several of our projects actually, our programs and projects actually use that same kind of model. So in human rights, we are collaborating with partner organizations working at the intersection of human rights technology. So activists, reporters, journalists, as well as folks who are actually the technologists. And last spring, members of the human rights team hosted a 2-day workshop in New York City focused on securing information and data collection. And it was designed for a very broad audience. So again, from human rights practitioners to journalists, anyone really interested in protecting their information and sources, and social justice actors really engaged in mobile data collection. So not only of interest in what we classically call human rights, but I think a burning issue for a lot of people right now and just in general. But the heart, really, I think, of Benetech's efforts to increase the engagement of the technology sector is really in social coding for good. So that's the other program that I promised we'd spend a little bit more time on. It's a project within our Benetech labs, which means it's a little bit nascent, it's still a bit experimental, but it's something that, as I mentioned earlier, we've already been able to engage more than 1,000 volunteers on. So social coding for good brings together communities of individuals and corporate social responsibility teams to volunteer technical skills to nonprofit partners. So not just Benetech, but other nonprofit partners, so they can develop and maintain free and open source software. So again, we match individuals and corporate social responsibility teams. And so here you can see some of the teams that we've worked with, including Google, LinkedIn, VMware, HP, and then humanitarian free and open source software partners, so HFOSS partners, like Amara, Code for America, the MIFOS initiative, just a lot of different partners. As nonprofits, Social Coding for Good partners have really lean engineering teams, as you can imagine. So this is really about capacity building. So every contribution, it not only builds the capacity of that particular nonprofit, but it also just positively affects every person these humanitarian organizations serve. So it's a really wonderful kind of direct link to nonprofits that are already having impact. So we're pairing people up with proven players in humanitarian services. So Social Coding for Good stewards the contributors. We do the matching and offers skill-based opportunities, not just for coding. So if you're a designer, if you are someone who likes to work on hardware a little bit and wants to do something a little bit different, then we can try to engage you within a project. So just a few examples of projects. And so Social Coding for Good works in many ways like the the MathML cloud story I just told you, which is sometimes they start with small projects, so you only have a data volunteer. Say, your company only has, 2 or 3 days a year that you can actually commit to something. We have small projects that you can do. So this is an example of some work on the Mozilla popcorn maker that Cisco volunteers worked on to basically build quizzes and real-time learning functionality using Mozilla Popcorn Maker so that educators could have a free and open source way to build some interactive content. But we also see the value in extended projects. So extending the life of a project is really the best way to extend the impact of that project. So in this example, Mifos is one of our longtime partners, and we had a VMware employee focus a 3-month service learning project on redesigning the Mifos interface. So she is a designer, and she went in and spent a lot of time embedded with Mifos to actually redesign their UI. So, as I said earlier, we've engaged more than 1,000 volunteers in technology-related projects through Social Coding for Good. It's one way for us to help build communities that increase all of our capacities and match our skills to meaningful projects, your skills to meaningful projects. And like Diagram, Social Coding for Good pulls together teams of people who may not otherwise come together. And it really allows people to make a direct difference. It gives people the scaffolding, and I think that's, again, the important thing. A lot of people want to actually be able to do good, but they don't necessarily know the avenues to do it. So giving people the scaffolding, the pathway, that can make all the difference in the world. So you want to make a difference. If you want to make a difference, you could start a nonprofit, like Jim. You could join a nonprofit, like me. But most importantly, I'm really urging you to join forces. So really, I want you to look around at your neighbors in this room, right here in this audience. Think about how you could be working together. If you don't have a project, we can help you find a project. But really, share your ideas, share your passion, share your technology. Don't be shy. And really, we can empower each other to do good by really connecting and collaborating together. So, in that spirit, I urge you to actually keep in touch. We're at benetech.org. Those are some of our, you can find us on Twitter at Benetech. Diagram C is the Diagram Center. SC4G is Social Coding for Good. Stay in touch with us, and if we can ever help you with that scaffolding, let us know. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anne. Does anyone have any questions? I know I have a question, so. One of the questions I have is, engineers are very busy people, and getting them to volunteer and engage in humanitarian projects is often quite difficult. So how have you guys been able to overcome those barriers?
Yes, engineers are very, very, very busy people. I think there are 2 things that have been really critical. One is we try to make it as easy as possible. So it's not like you have to come in and if you've tried to do a volunteer project with an organization that is not quite as organized as you would like, it may be a little hard to get started. And we try to make it as easy as possible. We try to make the description of what you're working on, the repo that you're working in, everything as sort of smooth as possible. And I think that people appreciate that and are more willing to work. The other element of this is people who are busy really want to know that their work has an impact. It's really hard to spend a day or 2 of your time and then not see the outcome of that. So that's why with Social Coding for Good in particular, we are pairing up with partners that we know will be able to let you see that impact, which is another hard thing to do. So if any of you do charitable giving, sometimes it's hard to know, is my dollar gonna, or is that really going to make an impact? Same goes for your time. We try to make that really easy.
Awesome, thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, yeah, there's actually a question.
That's a really great question, and I almost wish I could invite you up here to talk about it, because it sounds like you actually have spent a lot of time thinking about that. So, I mean, I can speak to it only from the viewpoint of the volunteers that we've worked with and some of the community members we've worked with, and I think, I don't think a lot of people have given it the kind of thought that you're talking about, and sometimes we have to remind people that these are open source projects, and we actually have to clarify for folks. But not everything we do is open source. And I think one of the things that we want to be as much, as important and powerful as it is, we also recognize that in some cases we will say, this is an open source license, but it's a commercial friendly license. We don't want to close any doors if it means it's going to help somebody. But yes, we are great defenders of open source as well. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think tomorrow morning, yeah. Tomorrow morning, you guys are going to be starting again at 8 a.m., I think, back in this room. So go get some sleep. But the other thing is breakfast at 7 even, so we're going to be up really early. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's correct. We're having breakfast at 7, so you don't come in here starving. We have plenty of coffee and even caffeinated tea. We'll be starting at 8 in the morning with a couple of excellent speakers, so I hope you guys wake up in time.
And I think the other thing I was going to mention was there is parking not in the hotel area, so if you're driving in, you can park on the back streets, and it's free there. So save you a couple dollars, hopefully. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Hey, you have any questions? Yeah. If you have any questions about young professionals or IEEE in general, come talk to me during the conference sometime.